Hello fourth year students. Today we are going to talk about a new item or feature related to the subject of negation in English, and this feature is called the scope of negation. We are going to first of all to define what we mean by the scope of negation. How do we decide this scope starts from where and ends where, and how does this scope work in the sentence? Okay, so what is the scope of negation? It is a stretch of language over which the negative meaning operates. So stretch means it is a part of the language which has a negative meaning. Why does it have a negative meaning? Because it is this stretch of language, in fact, it starts with what? With the negative word, that is not. Is it clear? So the scope of negation normally extends from the negative word itself to what? To the end of the clause, or to the beginning of a final agent. What does it mean, a final agent? It means the adverb. If you use an adverb at the end of the sentence, we are going to see later, it is going to be either within the scope or outside it. The subject and any agents occurring before the prediction normally lie outside it. So we know that the subject and the operator usually appear, okay, before the not, before the particle of negation not. So are they going to be within the scope of negation? No, they are going to be outside it, because the scope of negation, if as you see, it starts from the not itself, the word of negation itself, to the end of the clause. The operator is sometimes within and sometimes outside the scope. This is a very important point we have to pay attention to, related to the operator. Sometimes we can include it within the scope of negation, and sometimes we can keep it outside, and we are going to see how. So this is a very important thing. What is important here to learn or to know about the scope of negation is the definition of this term. It is related to the part of the language or the part of the sentence that has a negative meaning. How does it have a negative meaning? Of course, because it's in the structure of the sentence there is not. So the scope of negation starts from the not itself, or the word that we use to change the sentence into negative, to the end of the clause, or to the final agent. What do you mean by the final agent? It is the adverbs that are used at the end of the sentence. Sometimes we may include them within the scope of negation, and sometimes we do not. What about the subject and the operator? These two words, since they come or appear in the sentence before the word of negation, before the negative word, that is not or never, so here they are going to be outside it. But it is very important to know that not all the times, especially when we are talking about the operator, sometimes we can include it within the scope of negation. Sometimes they are, although they precede the operators, although they precede the negative word, but they can be affected or they can have a negative meaning. Okay. So if we examine these two sentences, I think the definition will be clear enough. For example, when I say, I definitely didn't speak to him, and I didn't definitely speak to him. So you see here, the scope of negation in this sentence starts from the first sentence, starts from not to the end of the sentence, which is him. What about the subject I, the adverb definitely, and did as an operator? Since they precede the particle of negation not, so they are outside. They are positive in meaning. Now, which part of the sentence that has a negative meaning? It is not speak to him. So what does this mean? It means it is definite, it is sure that I did not speak to him. Okay, so here, why definite here? or why sure the adverb definitely is positive? Because here it lies outside the scope of negation. It comes or in the sentence before the word or the particle of negation not. Go to the second sentence and find that it is going to be within the scope of negation. Why is that? Because we have put it here where after the word of negation. So here in the second sentence, I didn't definitely speak to him. The scope of negation starts from not to the end of the sentence, him. So here definitely comes after the word of negation. So here it comes within the scope of negation. So here it becomes what it is. It becomes negative. So the meaning here of definitely is not definite, not sure. Is it clear? So what lies outside the scope of negation is only the subject and the operator. So the sentence of the meaning of the sentence now becomes different, and it becomes what? It is not definite that I did. So you see, changing the position of the adverb from inside to outside or from outside to inside the scope of negation has changed the meaning of the sentence. When an adverbial is final, you remember we talked in the definition about the final agent. And the agent here means adverbial. So when you have your sentence ending with an agent, whether it is a simple adverb or adverbial as a prepositional phrases, or a noun or a clause, if you remember what we talked about the adverb before, when you are having this element, the adverbial at the end of the sentence, it may or may not lie outside the scope. So it is either within the scope or it is outside it. And as you see, as you remember, we said that when it is within the scope of negation, inside the scope of negation, it becomes negative. But when it is outside the scope of negation, it has a positive meaning. So also this what there will be a difference in meaning between the two cases. For example, I wasn't listening all the time. So this sentence has can have two different meanings according to your scope of negation starts from where and stops where. So if it starts from not to listening while keeping all the time this adverbial outside the scope of negation, so here the here that it means all of the times or all the time, sorry, it is what? Positive. So the meaning of the sentence is I listened none of the time. I didn't listen at all. Is it clear? Is it clear? I didn't listen all the time. But when I say I wasn't listening all the time, here, when we change the scope of negation to make it include or put all the time within the scope of negation, so all the time is going to have a negative meaning also. So this means that I listened some of the time. Okay, so you see here the adverbial, the final adverbial may be within the scope of negation or outside it, and for each case it will have its own meaning. Okay, so if you see, you remember what we said about the assertive and non-assertive forms. We said the assertive forms are used in positive sentences, while the non-assertive forms are used in the in the negative sentences. So if you come across a sentence with a sentence in English that is negative, but you see that the speaker or the writer has used an assertive form, here the speaker or the writer of the sentence will explain that he is not including this assertive form within the scope of negation. So since it is outside the scope of negation, it is positive, and it is going to be assertive and non-assertive, or and non-assertive. For example, I didn't listen to some of the speakers. You see here, although the sentence is negative, sorry, we have not didn't, but with it he has used some. This means that the scope of negation starts from not to listen only. What about the final agent or the final adverbial? To some of the speakers, and this is a prepositional phrase. Here this has been left outside the scope of negation. Since it is put outside the scope of negation, it is not included within it, so it is positive, as a positive meaning. And since it has a positive meaning, we have to use some and not any. So here he wanted to say, or the speaker wanted to say, that I listen to some. Okay, so for example, there are 10 speakers. I listened to some of those 10 speakers, while the other, for example, to 3 speakers, 4 speakers. What about the other speakers of the 10? I didn't listen to them. Okay, so here there is an actual happening of listening to some of them while not listening to the other part, or to the rest of the speakers. I didn't listen to any of the speakers. So here you see he's using any, and we know that any is a non-assertive form. So since the speaker or the writer of the sentence has used any, here he wants to say that the scope of his negation starts from not itself to the end of the sentence. So this means that the prepositional phrase, the adverbial, to some of the speakers or to any of the speakers are going to be included within the scope of negation. So since they are inside the scope of negation, they have to be negative, and here in this case we are not using some but any. So when he is to any of the speakers, here is negative. So all the sentence now, all the part of the sentence from not to the end of the sentence is negative in meaning and in structure. This means that the speaker of the sentence or the writer of the sentence has listened to none of the speakers. Okay? So this is what we have about the scope of negation. It is a very short video because it tells you a very important points or notes regarding the scope of negation, how to identify it. It starts from where and ends where in the sentence, or stops where in the sentence. And this, especially this is stopping. Okay, your scope of negation stops where the sentence will affect the meaning of the sentence when you are going to put things inside the scope of negation. So they are going to be negative in structure and in meaning. But when you are putting things outside the scope of negation, here you are having 2 parts in your sentence. One part that is within the scope of negation and they are negative, and another part that is outside the scope of negation and positive. Okay, I hope that what we said about the scope of negation is clear enough, and thank you.